welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and the second of our programmes on the fate of the Chagos Islanders. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the UK forcibly removed the entire population of the Chagos archipelago, an area that for colonial administration purposes had been part of Mauritius. And on the largest island, Diego Garcia, it allowed the US to build a strategically important military base. In our first edition covering this story, we told some of the human impact on the Chagosians cleared from their Indian Ocean homeland. Now, there are first, second and indeed third generations in exile in Mauritius, but also here in the UK, with a 3,000-strong community still grouped in the towns around Gatwick Airport, where they first landed in this country. Today we'll look at some of the international ramifications of the UK being in the dock not just of world opinion, but that of the International Court of Justice. We speak to Alan Venkatesan, nominated as President in Exile of the Islanders, and to a former UK ambassador about the diplomatic impact of the UK being found to have acted unlawfully by the International Court. But first to Alex with your tweets, your messages and your emails.
Our first show a couple of weeks ago in the Chagos Islands provoked quite a bit of reaction. First from two people who appeared on the show, two of the Islanders, Isabel and Bertrand. Isabel said, "Home is where your heart belongs. My heart belongs to the Chagos Islands." And Bertrand said, "I forgot to mention, we are not after compensation. We Chagosians just want one thing, to return back to our islands." Now, Mary White sent us a series of messages on Facebook. The UK government does not even recognise they did anything wrong. And now, speaking about Isabel, obviously, Mary says, "Lovely lady, I hope our people get to go home." And then my nephew used to work there when he was in the Navy. He said there was propaganda circulated saying it was all necessary. Colonel Gordon C. says the Empire, as they called themselves, have a lot to answer for. The only good thing about all empires is that they fall. And finally, Karen Martin says, "Man Fridays," and there Karen's referring to the description found within the official documents of how Foreign Office officials described the Chagosians. Man Fridays, that description alone tells us all we need to know about the mentality of successive UK governments.
With Brexit dominating the political bandwidth, few other issues at present are breaking through in the media. However, last month there was enough of a break in the European storm clouds to allow the publicity to shine on the International Court of Justice decision, ruling that the UK had acted illegally as a colonial power in depopulating the islands and instructing the islands be returned to Mauritius as a step to allowing full self-determination. This is what the Hague Court had to say.
The court was of the opinion that the United Kingdom's continued administration of the Chagos archipelago constitutes a wrongful act entailing the international responsibility of that state, that the United Kingdom has an obligation to bring to an end its administration of the Chagos archipelago as rapidly as possible, and that all member states must cooperate with the United Nations to complete the decolonisation of Mauritius. Since respect for the right to self-determination is an obligation, erga omnes, all states have a legal interest in protecting that right, the court found. It considered that while it is for the General Assembly to pronounce on the modalities required to ensure the completion of the decolonisation of Mauritius, all member states must cooperate with the United Nations to put those modalities into effect. As regards the resettlement on the Chagos archipelago of Mauritian nationals, including those of Chagosian origin, the court was of the view that this is an issue relating to the protection of the human rights of those concerned, which should be addressed by the General Assembly during the completion of the decolonisation of Mauritius.
Alex asked the leading Chagosian representative whether this is a major step forward in their campaign for return, or whether the court, while finding against Britain, had effectively sidestepped the issue of the right of return of the islanders themselves.
And now I'm delighted to be joined by Alan Venkatesan, President in Exile of Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands. Welcome, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Now, Alan, that's a big title. How did you become to be President in Exile?
In 2011, we decided to have a provisional government in exile established in the United Kingdom, simply because people in Mauritius, they were talking on our behalf, and we didn't want to continue with that.
It should be said that you'll be buoyed by the International Court of Justice finding in favour not just of Mauritius, but also of the rights of self-determination of the Chagos Islanders.
This court found out that the right of self-determination is for the Mauritians only, the people of Mauritius. But the Chagos Islanders, they are a people who is autochthonous, and they should have that right apart from the Mauritians.
But you would be encouraged that the UK's role in this has been indicted by, I think, 14 out of the 15 judges in the International Court of Justice. That's quite something.
Yeah, that's true, but there is nothing in it for us at all, because if the UK decide to give this back to Mauritius, the Chagosian people will be the great losers in this situation.
So how do then you see the route forward for the community of Chagosians?
What I'm saying is that this government needs to do the right thing. They need to implement the feasibility report done by KMG on resettlement in the Chagos Islands. So, because this report stipulated that a resettlement is feasible and there is no legal barrier to it.
But in 2016, of course, the UK government said that can't be done. And, of course, they renewed the American license to use Diego Garcia, your main island, for the next 20 years as an airport runway.
Yes, and they were complaining about the cost for a pilot resettlement, but now, you know, with Brexit, they'll have to spend billions concerning the European Union. I see no reason why they can't foot the bill for about 50 of us or 100 of us to start living in our homeland.
And what indications do you see from the present government that they are prepared to make a concession? I mean, as things stand, they're not even prepared to allow third-generation Chagosians to stay in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, that's a very alarming situation, and there is a bill in Parliament for the time being, and we don't know. This is
from the local Member of Parliament who represents many of the islanders.
That is correct. This is from Henry Smith, private bill, and if this is successful, only then we will find that the third generation will be able to stay in the UK. So we have a complex situation, really.
Well, Mr. President, you've had many parliamentary champions over the years, some of the greatest names in UK politics. I think of the redoubtable Tam Dalyell, who was my MP when I was growing up as a lad in Linlithgow. So how have they tried to progress your case? And where do you think you stand now after this 50-year struggle for justice?
I think it's getting more and more complex, and I believe Parliament need to do something about it, and I believe the administration of the British Indian Ocean Territory needs to change, needs to be dismantled really, and that Chagos should be placed under Parliament. Otherwise, there is no way that Chagosians will be allowed back. Things need to change.
Tell me a bit about your own family background, you know, your own ancestors, which island they were on, when did they get taken out of the island? What was your own background, Mr. President?
My grandparents, they were born in Diego Garcia. We were exiled. I was 1 year old at the time. We were sent to Mauritius without our consent, without our permissions. You know, we didn't ask to be removed. They removed us by force. We had no other way. We had no say in our removal. There was no consultation, nothing. My parents went to traveled by ship in this forced exile to Mauritius, and I made my way to the UK with a group of people, 18 of us, in September 2002. We reached Gatwick Airport here, and I started a campaign for our people to get a accommodation, and we started a new life. Then I managed to get another group of 50 people in 2003 and 120 end of 2004. Now this has grown to about 3,000 people in Crawley itself.
And what are your hopes now, Mr. President, for achieving justice for your people? Do you see the United Nations General Assembly, who will probably, in all probability, take the International Court of Justice ruling and discuss it in full session? Do you see that as the route forward? Are you hopeful about the private bill to secure the the residential rights of Chagosian third generation in the UK? Or do you think there's some other method you could now use to forward your campaign?
It's complex. It's very difficult. I think it's getting more difficult because of this opinion of this International Court of Justice. But now I think members of parliament need really to bring this government, into scrutiny concerning the Chagos Islands. We cannot have a situation where another state will have the island back instead of us, the autochthonous people of these islands. As you know, around the globe, there are other British overseas territories, such as, for example, Pitcairn Islands. They got about 42 people, yet this country is looking after them, is supporting them. They've got an island council and everything. Why not us?
Do you ever feel that if you take the comparison between the Falkland Islanders, where the UK fought a war to keep them from the Argentinians, and the Chagos Islanders, where the United Kingdom repatriated them forcibly and then gave the island away effectively to the Americans? Do you ever think that's an astonishing contrast?
It is an astonishing construct, and my fear is that this situation may continue in this new era, that they can go and give back the island to Mauritius, and we will be the losers. We should be included in all negotiations in future.
How confident are you that one day you won't be a president in exile, but you'll be a president in situ in these wonderful islands in the Indian Ocean?
It is possible, but there is a need for efforts to be done from every side. From the UK, from the United Nations, every corners need to pull their effort together for this to happen. We are talking about British Islanders here, and we are defending people around the globe in other nations, yet there are British subjects whose rights have been looked down by this country. The human rights has been refused, denied, and we have been exiled. I believe it's high time for a change. I believe it's high time for people to put their effort together and make our return possible so that we become a nation, a people that can stand on our feet and can be proud to be British.
And how realistic is it, given the various reports that the UK government have put forward, they're saying that it'd be very difficult to resettle? What would people do? Would it be viable as an entity? How realistic do you feel it is that the community of Chagosians could actually make a success of repopulating these islands?
It can be successful because the report of KPMG feasibility study in 2015 has said that resettlement is feasible and that there is no legal barrier to it. So I see no reason why Her Majesty's British Indian Ocean Territory administration cannot do it. It's just that they've got fear. I don't know the reason why, but it is possible, it is feasible. Why not doing it now?
So, Mr. President, there are millions of people watching this broadcast worldwide. What's your message to the international community to secure justice for your own community of islanders?
I believe the international community must prioritize the right of the autochthonous people of the Chagos Islands, that is the Chagosians. They should make a decision to allow us back to resettle us in our homeland first. Then comes the issue about the state of Mauritius.
And address the British government. What would you say to the British government about it being time to deal justly with the Chagosians?
I believe that Parliament needs to look at the British Indian Ocean Territories administration, that this administration should be dismantled because it has kept us away from our homeland and continues to do so, and that Chagos Islands must be put under Parliament.
Alan, Mr. President, thank you so much. Now, I cannot guarantee you imminent return to the islands. Yes. What I can do is present you with the Alex Salmond Quaich. Quaich is Scots Gaelic for a loving cup.
Yes.
Scotch whisky, only Scotch whisky, none of this rum stuff.
Yes.
In the Quaich, and then pass it round all the islanders.
Thank you very much, sir.
And thank you for appearing on the show, Alan.
Thank you.
Join us after the break when we look at the international ramifications of the court decision with the former UK ambassador, Craig Murray. We'll see you then. Welcome back. The International Court decision was being watched carefully by Mauritius, the UK government and the Chagosian community.
Yesterday's hearing provided an advisory opinion, not a judgment. We will, of course, consider the detail of the opinion carefully, but this is a bilateral dispute, and for the General Assembly to seek an advisory opinion by the ICJ was therefore a misuse of powers which sets a dangerous precedent for other bilateral disputes. The defence facilities on the British Indian Ocean Territory help to keep people here in Britain and around the world safe, and we will continue to seek a bilateral solution to what is a bilateral dispute with Mauritius.
The Prime Minister of Mauritius, His Excellency Pravind Kumar Jugnauth, had a very different reaction to the court decision. This is a historic moment for Mauritius and all its people, including the Chagosians who were unconscionably removed from their homeland and prevented from returning for the last half-century. Our territorial integrity will now be made complete, and when that occurs, the Chagosians and their descendants will finally be able to return home. However, the implications for the UK standing in the world are far-reaching. Alex talks to Craig Murray, former UK ambassador, now historian and human rights activist.
Craig Murray, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much.
Now, as a former ambassador, former diplomat, you've read the findings, the judgment of the International Court of Justice. How damning was that of the United Kingdom?
Well, it was extremely damning. It repudiated at length all of the United Kingdom's arguments. It denied that this was simply a bilateral dispute between Britain and Mauritius and stated in terms it's part of the decolonisation process. It stated that there was no free will in the original Mauritian decision to give up the Chagos Islands, that they were subject in effect to blackmail as a condition of independence, and it refuted the argument that the Chagos Islanders had been fairly compensated and therefore no longer had any claim. So, I mean, really, the British government lost on every single argument it put forward.
And of course, there was two main parts of the judgment. The first was to decide whether the court itself had competence to judge the dispute. And on that, the court was unanimous, with even the American judge ruling against Britain.
Yes, I think the argument that the British government had no competence, which was based on the idea that this was a bilateral dispute unrelated to decolonisation, to which the British government had not agreed, because bilateral disputes can only be resolved or referred to the ICJ by agreement. And that argument was, always extremely weak, because the idea that the fate of the Chagos Islanders has nothing to do with decolonisation is obviously, intellectually unsustainable. So it's really not at all surprising that the ICJ were fairly contemptuous in their handling of that argument from the British government. The American judge, of course, dissented from the main opinion, and that was on a variation of the argument about bilateral disputes and on the argument that at the time of the Chagos decisions, international law on self-determination wasn't sufficiently developed. And I mean, to be honest, it's a pretty tenuous opinion by the American judge if you read the side opinion. But the even more important point, of course, is that the two European Union country judges on the court found against the United Kingdom, and quite resoundingly so. So in terms of diplomatic isolation, in international law circles, that's about as bad as it gets.
But the Foreign Office have said, look, this is not a binding decision, it's merely advisory. Is there not something in the UK government's argument, well, the International Court of Justice can chunter all it's like, but they can't make us do anything, and we're not going to do it?
For the British government to effectively repudiate the ICJ and say what the ICJ says is not important is unprecedented. I mean, I can think of nothing like this at all. To simply dismiss the International Court of Justice, this is going to have consequences for the British government going forward, because the opinion given by the International Court of Justice was an opinion rendered to the General Assembly of the United Nations, which is charged with overseeing the process of decolonisation. And this will now go back to the General Assembly for a vote. And there, I think, you will see an extreme isolation, diplomatic isolation of the United Kingdom. The European Union judges on the court found against the UK. If it wasn't for Brexit, then possibly the UK could have hoped for some support from the European Union, but I'm absolutely sure it will get no support now and will be in a kind of basket of exceptionalist countries, along with probably the United States, Israel, the Marshall Islands, and perhaps one or two other US clients.
Can you give us an insight into why the Foreign Office are acting as they're acting? I mean, it would have been possible, surely, it costs money, but you could resettle the Chagosians. The UK, as the former colonial power, could have acted as an arbiter to make sure the Mauritian government allows resettlement and doesn't just resettle the islands with whoever they want. Both the Mauritian government and indeed the Chagosian representatives say they're not intending to kick the Americans out when they get back to the islands. They're quite happy to negotiate or renegotiate. Why would it have been possible to pursue that line when even the interests of the American base are not apparently fundamentally at threat? I mean, why risk being the international pariah all for the sake of a bit of cash and not being prepared to do the hard work of negotiating a position for these islanders?
Well, that, of course, is a fascinating question. And if we go back to 1998, there was a High Court judgment won by the islanders on their right to resettle. And Robin Cook accepted, while Robin Cook was Foreign Secretary, accepted and adopted the idea of resettling the islanders. And Robin Cook, in fact, went so far as to repeal the order in council forbidding the islanders from resettling, and then started work on preparations for a resettlement program. After, of course, Robin Cook was sacked as Foreign Secretary, precisely because of his unwillingness to kowtow to American foreign policy all the time, under heavy American pressure, Jack Straw reversed that, and in fact a new order in council or immigration order was put in place forbidding resettlement all over again, and the policy was reversed. But there was a brief period under Robin Cook who felt very strongly on a personal level that the policy was unethical, when the kind of solution you suggest could have been adopted. But the truth is the Americans are against it.
That, of course, was the relatively brief period of the ethical foreign policy being pursued by the late Robin Cook as the Foreign Secretary.
Yes, that's right. He definitely felt, and quite rightly felt, that what we had done for Chagosians was completely unethical, and that outweighed any pressure from the Americans. Whereas his successor, Jack Straw, immediately bowed to the pressure from the Americans to exclude the local population. And that, of course, was precisely at the time Jack Straw brought in his new legislation banning Chagos Islanders from settling or even visiting the islanders in 2004, which was precisely the time at which Diego Garcia was being used for extraordinary rendition and torture operations. And that might be one reason why they didn't want any local people about who might find out what's going on, that it's not merely a nuclear-armed military base, it's a black site where the Americans are very, very keen to keep everyone as far away as possible.
Now, one final question, Craig Murray. In the embarrassing internal memorandums that were exposed before the International Court of Justice, there were phrases like Man Fridays and Tarzans used by UK officials to describe the Chagosians. In your time as the Foreign Office, a generation later, admittedly, were there any such expressions being used that the UK would rather not see the light of day, revealing as they did the attitude of key officials in the Foreign Office?
I'm glad to say I can't recall seeing anything quite that bad, although some of the things that were said in the Foreign Office would occasionally make your hair stand on end. But I'd also like to remind you, the very embarrassing minutes that were disclosed in the judgment, revealing that Harold Wilson was briefed to frighten, and that was the word used in the official minutes, that he had to frighten Mauritius into giving up the islands on the threat of otherwise not getting their independence. And I think that, in a way, sums up how sickeningly immoral the British government attitude has been on this case in the whole time.
And of course, you're speaking to us from Edinburgh. There is a Scottish connection to all of this, because one of the things the UK got in return was a discount on the Polaris missile system.
That's true. And that, of course, is something which we in Scotland are mostly very keen to get rid of as soon as possible.
Craig Murray from Edinburgh, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I hope that viewers not previously familiar with the Chagos story have found these two episodes very revealing. I've had a personal interest in the plight of the islanders since the late Tam Daly MP asked if I would give him a hand in one of his many parliamentary initiatives on the issue. It is a compelling story of manifest injustice, and the personal oppression of the mild-mannered Chagosians makes it all the more riveting. However, the recent International Court of Justice judgment on the issue gives it an overarching importance. The Hague Court's conclusions were devastating. Every international judge, bar the single American, found against Britain. Indeed, on the issue of the jurisdiction of the court itself, the judgment against Britain was unanimous. But the real shaming of Britain does not lie in the judgment. It lies first in the evidence presented to the court. Not only were the islanders treated with inhuman contempt, they were described as such, as Man Fridays and Tarzans in the official British accounts of the time. They were bought and sold like chattels for a discount on the Polaris nuclear system. All this in living memory from the country which still boasts about its role in the abolition of slavery. The second shame is even more damning, and that is in the hard-line rejection of the court's judgment. The tweets from the court had barely gone live when the Foreign Office were describing it as merely advisory and non-mandatory. In fact, this is the highest international court in the world. To reject it because of inconvenience goes far beyond the merely short-sighted. As the redoubtable Winnie Ewing once put it, Britannia has been reduced from ruling the waves to waiving the rules. Now, it would be possible for Britain to come to terms with both Mauritius and the Chagos Islanders. Indeed, it's Britain's inescapable moral responsibility to uphold the right of return of the Chagosians, and it would be even possible to bring both to terms with a continuing American base in Diego Garcia. All it requires is some imagination, some cash, and a little bit of humility. Instead, the UK government has chosen to reject multilateralism and the international order and enlist as a junior partner instead in the US model of exceptionalism, standing outside the rule of international law. Now, given that the United Kingdom has expended many lives and much treasure in supposedly maintaining the exact opposite, it seems a stance both of consummate stupidity and complete diplomatic incoherence. The treatment of the Chagos Islanders makes the United Kingdom look just as much sad as bad, not just arrogant, but ridiculous, the holy willy of international politics. And so from Taz, myself, and all at the show, it's goodbye for now.